John, the 12th chapter, just 7 verses for your hearing. Starting at verse 12. And when you find it, please signify by saying amen. And here is where you find these words, beloved. On the next day, much people that were come to the feast, when they heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of palm trees and went forth to meet him and cried, Hosanna! Blessed is the King of Israel that cometh in the name of the Lord. And Jesus, when he had found a young ass, sat thereon, as it is written, Fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, the King cometh, sitting on an ass's coat. These things understood not the disciples at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then remembered that these things were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. Beloved, the people therefore that was with him when he called Lazarus out of his grave and raised him from the dead bear record. For this cause the people also met him, for that they heard that he had done this miracle. The Pharisees said among them, Perceive ye how long ye prevail? Nothing, behold, the world is gone after him. Family, I want to talk to you very briefly from this subject this morning. Jesus is the King of Kings. Jesus is the King of Kings. In this 12th chapter of John's Gospel, Jesus is once more about to reveal his identity to the nation of Israel. They will be given one final opportunity to receive their king. This chapter, which records the details of the last few days of Christ's public ministry, paints a portrait of Jesus as being the king. In order to understand the events and the significance of the triumphal entry, you must understand that the events that transpired in chapter 11 are the events that led up to his triumphal entry. Beloved, Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead, and the people were so drawn to that the Pharisees said in John 11:47, Then gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees a council and said, What do we do with him? For this man doeth many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. Beloved, we must understand as we dig deeper into the text that the events that happened in chapter 12 would not have been significant if it had not been for the events in chapter 11. The fact that Jesus raised a dead man from the grave who had been dead for 4 days prompted the Pharisees to say, we got to do something about this man. Y'all talk back to me. Beloved, isn't it strange how when people catch you doing your best thing for the Lord, that's when you come with the most opposition and controversy? Jesus' crucifixion happened because of him being great. A family, I wish I could explain it a little bit better, but people don't like to oftentimes see you operate in your greatness. Well, let me say it this way. We say it this way. Why don't you just let me be great? Hey, but there's a lot of folk, beloved. There's a lot of folk that don't want you to be great, because if you're great and they want to be around you, then it's going to require greatness from them. Some folk in life, beloved, don't want to be great. They're satisfied with just being an individual who does just enough or gives just enough or has just enough. But I've come by to tell you today that because Jesus is the King of Kings and he's my Father and I have an inheritance, I have an expectation of greatness in my view. And I don't want anything other than the greatness that God has in store for me. So if it means me walking past you, me walking over you, me walking around you, don't get upset. Just let me be great. Oh, I wish I had about 4 or 5 folk that's been walking in their greatness, and now you got folk that don't want to walk with you because they can't keep up with your pace. You don't be mad at me because you can't keep up. You better find another group to roll with because we rolling for greatness. Let me be great. And here's the great thing. Jesus didn't need a crowd. He really didn't even need the disciples. He was great all by himself. And so what I need you to know is you don't need nobody in order to be great because you plus God is great. You plus God is great. You waiting on somebody else, but you plus God, don't make me throw my Michael Jackson, you plus God is great. But here's the problem. A lot of us don't believe that greatness is destined for our lives. And the enemy got you believing that the little bit you got is all you deserve. But when you've prayed hard and you've worked hard and you... Tell your neighbor, let me be great. He is the King of Kings. Jesus' crucifixion caused all of this. Watch this. They hated. They hated the fact, Cerise, that he was a miracle-working God. Man, he was great at working miracles. I'm a miracle right now. And that's why I'm great. See, I think some of y'all getting this confused. You think I'm speaking of my greatness because of my accomplishments. I haven't accomplished anything outside of Jesus. But because he's accomplished things through me, that makes me a benefactor of being great. Changing water into wine at Cana, that made him great. Healing the royal official sons in Capernaum, that made him great. Healing the paralytic at Bethesda in the 5th chapter of John made him great. Feeding the 5,000, beloved, that made him great. Jesus walking on water, that made him great. Healing the blind man from birth and putting him at the gate called Beautiful, that made him great. But the raising of Lazarus was the final straw because that made him real great. But can I go a little bit further? When he got me out of my addiction, he was great. When he got me off drugs, he was great. When he got me out the whorehouse, he was great. When he got me from lying, he was great. See, sometimes you're forgetting the fact that the things he did in your life made you great. I'm only great because of him. I couldn't have achieved greatness by myself, for myself. I'm great because I serve a great God. He proved his identity time and time again by his miracles, by his pedigree, by the place of his birth, by signs and wonders too numerous to even mention. Yet they refused to believe that he in fact was the Messiah. Time and time again he revealed himself unto them, and time again they rejected him. Family, there's nothing worse than having to prove yourself time and time again, only to be rejected. He was rejected so much that John put it this way. He said he came into his own, and his own received him not. That Jesus came in his own intimate way, as in his family and his friends, yet they refused to have anything to do with him. Family, it's your family. A lot of times it's your family that won't let you be great. Or they can't see greatness in you because they remember all the things that you've done. And those are the ones who are so quick to remind you of when you messed up. I can imagine Jesus' brothers, James and Joseph and Simon and Jude, saying, why y'all listening to him? That ain't nothing but baby Jesus. I'm pausing here for introspection because some of you are starting to think about how you may have not allowed your own siblings to be great. Who have you stopped from being great because you didn't believe in their ability? I thank God that, family, before my sister went home to be with the Lord, she reminded me of all the good and all the great things. We sat on her bedside all the way up until the angels came and got her, and we was praising God. But what she was really doing was she was reminding me. She said, Dwayne, I remember where you came from, and I remember where you started, and now I see where you are today. The reason I'm leaving is because I'm ready. You're not leaving because you got more work to do. Family, I thank God that I had a sister who realized because I served the Lord, there was some greatness inside of me. But it's only because he's the King of Kings. It's the ones who are the closest to you that know all the tea. You ever go to a family reunion? Some of those things you did with your cousins, and you was hoping that they wasn't going to show up at the reunion because they still got evidence of things you all have done behind the house, behind the bushes, behind the school. Y'all just think about it for a minute. Some of y'all laughing too hard back there. Scooter about to fall out of his seat because Scooter, I can only imagine Scooter and Gerard's conversation. Jesus clearly proved his identity by fulfilling Zechariah's prophecy that we see in verse 15. When we go back to verse 15, just take an expository look. He says, fear not, daughter of Zion. Behold, thy king cometh sitting on an ass's coat. And here we see the prophecy or the prophetic word of Zechariah being lived out up to this very moment. Can I walk through the prophecy with you, family? Is that okay, Teresa? You ready for this prophetic word? Watch this. Jesus clearly proved his identity when the Romans, watch this, saw Jesus riding a donkey. They probably thought it was all a joke. After all, what king rides a donkey? They did not see him as a threat to the Roman power, and many of the Jews probably wondered why this one would be the king who was be riding in lowly on a donkey. After all, wouldn't the Messiah be riding a powerful workhorse? Wouldn't he come with great majestic horses around him? Wouldn't he show up with the best of robes and the best of men? Family, here is where we make a lot of our mistakes. When miracles, signs, and wonders show up in our lives, if they don't look like what we think they should look like, then we mess around and miss out on our blessing. And some of us sitting in here right now today have missed blessing after blessing after blessing because it wasn't dressed up the way you wanted it to be. Can I flip it though? Some of you messed up in here today because your blessing did come dressed up, but it was messed up when it was dressed up, and now you got to confess up. Hope you'll make it up. Because everything that God has for you may not look like you think it should look, but if you know that it came from God, then you should be happy because God is the giver of every good and perfect gift, and he will not withhold one good thing from his child. When it came from God, it's good. Tell your neighbor, it's good. No, tell your neighbor, it's good. Oh, y'all wake up, sleepy folk, and say, it's good. When it comes from the Lord, it is good. But you got to be able to recognize and identify the differences because there's many of wolves showing up in sheep's clothing. You got to pray and ask God for a discerning spirit so you are able to tell who's trying to keep you from being great. Even Christ's own disciples did not understand the importance of what they were witnessing. You mean the ones who was eating with him and sleeping with him and drinking with him and housing with him? They didn't understand. The ones who broke bread daily with him, the ones who went in Gethsemane to pray with him, the ones who called his name on a regular basis, Pastor, they didn't know who he was. Well, what's the significance of that? Sometimes, family, you got people around you that are with you, but they're not for you. They just happen to be in the same area that you in, but they really don't know nothing about you. Some of you right now are walking with people who don't have your best interests in hand, but there's some benefit to being with you. Now, you got to remind yourself what that benefit is, but there are folk who are closely connected, but they really not connected at all. And some of y'all got the same last name. You mean to tell me you've been walking with me and you don't know what I'm doing by now? You mean to tell me we've been laying in this bed for the last 30 years and you don't know what I like? You mean to tell me we've been hanging out for all these years and you still don't know how to satisfy me? It ain't that you don't know how, you just don't want to. And before your minds go down into the gutter, don't throw nothing at me, Cerise. Before your mind go down, there's folk who don't want to satisfy you spiritually. They don't want to pray for you. They don't want to fast with you. They don't want to walk with the Lord with you. Beloved, there are some folk that got a made-up mind that they're going to help you down the path of unrighteousness. And sometimes you sitting right next to them on Sunday morning and you know how you know? Because every Sunday morning, we got chairs that separate us. Some folk look like it be two people in one chair. Why you so close to that? Ain't your husband or your wife. Tell your neighbor, scoot down a little bit. I'm not here for that. I'm here for, oh, y'all make me sick. You don't act like y'all don't know what I'm talking about. I see everything and everybody, and I watch y'all come in church looking for. They get the shark eye, Tony. They like, and then you make your way around the sanctuary. It's about Jesus. Y'all get mad when I preach, and then you get mad when I tell the truth. And if you only knew how sick they was, you'd be trying to scoot away instead of scooting close. See, the pastor knows all the sickness. Y'all just see the outside, the shell. Y'all don't know what's going on the inside. But if I was you, I would move over. However, Am I meddling? However, anyone in the crowd who knew the prophecy of Zechariah, rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. Zechariah 9:9 says, when they saw Jesus entering into the city on this particular day, we knew exactly what was happening. Jesus presented himself just as the prophet had said that he would. And guess how he came? He came as a king. Jesus made his ride into Jerusalem on what we call this Sunday, Palm Sunday, just a few days before his death and exactly 1 week. Somebody say 1 week before his resurrection. His entrance into Jerusalem on this particular day was no coincidence. Rather, his entrance into Jerusalem coincided exactly with Daniel's prophecy as found in Daniel book chapter 9 verse 27. And now I need you all to just listen to this. These words of Daniel are prophetic, meaning that they're coming to pass. This here, Daniel is saying that this is a 490-year period. This is a general chronological order. They will begin with the order to rebuild Jerusalem, and we saw that fulfilled in Nehemiah 2:1-6. The next phase covers 69 weeks of years, broken down into two portions. It took 7 weeks of years, or 49 years, to rebuild Jerusalem. All of this during the time of great trouble, the days of Nehemiah. From that time, there were 62 weeks of years, or 434 years, until the Messiah was to come. If taken literally, these 83 years leading up to the coming of the Messiah would equal 173,880 days, ending on April 6, 32 AD, or the exact day that Jesus came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. Beloved, this was not a haphazard or a happenstance event, but the book of Daniel, the book of Zechariah, the readings of Nehemiah teaches us to the very exact day when Jesus was going to make his triumphal entry into Jerusalem as the King of Kings. This all sealed the fate of Israel, Tony. This entered us into what we know as the 400 years of silence between Malachi and Matthew. When you close out the Old Testament with Malachi and you get ready to go into the New Testament, into Matthew, Michelle, there are 400 years. And in these 400 years, no prayers was going up and no blessings was coming down. The hymnals got dusty. The choir robes got mildewed. No saints of knees was hitting the ground. But there was a time in which nothing was going on. But Jesus was getting the New Testament prepared for the new believers to come. Amen, somebody. Jesus is the King of Kings. Y'all give me 5 more minutes and then I'm going to go to my seat. The people who saw Jesus entering the city understood implications of what he was doing. That's why they cried out, Hosanna, which means save now. In light of his miracles, most notable the raising of Lazarus, and because of his public appeal, the people thought that Jesus would be the one who would overthrow the Roman government. So some people knew who he was, but they didn't have enough support to believe. They were looking for a ruler, yet how fickle they were. In just 5 days, the same people who was crying out, Hosanna, would be the same folk that would cry out, crucify him. Beloved, and this is just how fickle folk can be. In 5 days, family, that's all it took was 5 days. They went from crying out, Hosanna, the King in the highest, to crying out, crucify him. This same person that they lifted up with one hand, they tore down on the other hand. This same person who believed to be king, they now believe to be nothing. And family, don't you know that you can be around folk who will do you the same way? In one breath, they will say they love you, but by the next breath, they trying to kill you. By the first breath, they say they love you. In that second breath, they trying to destroy you. Tell your neighbor, it don't take long. See, sometimes you trying to build a case to see if they really murderers. But it don't take a lot of case building when somebody got a gun with bullets that's smoking to see if they really a murderer or not. You waiting on more evidence, but it's already evident. Oh, you waiting on evidence, Perry Mason. You waiting on the crime scene, but it's already evident that they don't love you, they don't care about you, they don't care if you fall or stumble. It's already evident. Stop looking for more evidence. Don't make me talk about the fact that when you ain't got nothing and they show up and see you don't have nothing, they leave the scene immediately. You know why? Because they are happy with watching you beg, borrow, and steal. But when you got folk who really around you that love you, they gonna make a deposit before they even get to your house because they already know what you need. Don't wait for somebody to show you how bad they are when they've given you enough evidence, and it's very evidence. Jesus demonstrated himself to be the King of the Jews. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. What if the Jews had received him as their king on that Palm Sunday? What would have happened if they would have accepted him for being Lord of Lords? Would the cross have still taken place if they would have believed in and on him? Would the king have still died if they would have believed in him? Certainly, Jesus, the Lamb who was slain before the foundations of the world, would have not come into existence if it had not been for the crucifixion that day. Had he not died, there would be no remission of sins. And almost all things are the law purged with blood, and without shedding of the blood, there is no remission. Oh my God. Had he not died, there would have been no salvation possible for any man. Had the Jews received Jesus as their king, he would have still have gone to Calvary. He would still have risen from the dead, and he would have still ascended back into heaven. But the tribulation would have happened 7 years later, and then there would have been no millennium. However, because they refused to have this man rule over them, they opened the door for the church age. And the age of salvation began for all men. Y'all help me right now. Jesus came to this world for the singular purpose of dying for our sins. Because he loves us so much, Romans 5:8 says it this way: but God commanded his love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Jesus the King is interested in drawing all men unto himself. Before he died, many came to the cross in faith. However, Jesus tells us by his death on the cross, and he says, I, and if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. There is something very compelling here about the cross. When it finally dawns on the lost sinner that Jesus hung there with, the Bible tells us that there was two sinners hanging on both sides of him. The story records that one of the men who were derailed on the side of Christ looked over and didn't understand exactly what was going on. But there was one lost sinner who was on the other side of him who said, Jesus, I want you to remember me when thou comest into thine kingdom. Beloved, I need you to understand today that it doesn't matter where you are in your life. All he is saying that, if I be lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. And so that day, beloved, when Jesus died, the same sinner went down to Hades, took a trip there, looked over into Abraham's bosom. And the same one that says, the first one who descended, he first ascended. And he robbed hell. And he led captivity captive. And he led them to heaven to prepare for New Jerusalem. I got to leave you there, Jesus. I got to leave you here for now. But on next week, when it's time for you to get up, oh, have he gotten up in your life today, church? If he's gotten up in your life, you don't have to wait till next week to shout. But you can shout right now that he got up in my life. Oh, my God. Jesus is the King of Kings. Let's give God a hand clap of praise.